I have with me Rebecca Cross. She's a partner at BraunHagey and Borden, LLP, out of San Diego?
San Francisco.
San Francisco, one of those sands. And it's very kind of you guys not just to come out, but also to sponsor what we're doing here. Can you tell us a little bit about what the firm does?
Sure. So we are a boutique firm based in San Francisco. We also have an office here in New York. And we have been working in the food space for about a decade. We started out as a pure litigation shop. That was, about the time that all the food companies were getting hit with labeling class actions. So we started in that area and then sort of unofficially were, working with companies on how not to get sued. About a few years ago, we were asked by several folks in the industry to start a practice group that really was like more of a soup to nuts general counsel practice for food product companies. And we gave in and just recently launched that a few months ago, sort of to the whole food space, not just our litigation clients. So it's super exciting to be here.
So on the soup to nuts side, that's a lot of contract negotiations, employee stuff, regulatory.
Yeah, I mean, everything from corporate formation to regulatory work, doing FDA compliance, making sure the labels and advertising aren't something that's going to put companies at risk for litigation, and also doing IP protection as well as, contracts throughout the distribution chain.
So let's talk about one of the sort of hot issues that's going on right now as we speak, which is there's been a major recall of products across several different companies that all deal with a sunflower seed ingredient.
Yeah.
What kind of advice do you have for brands, for companies that are facing that sort of tainted ingredient issue with regard to recalls? Is it more important to pull product quickly? Is it more important to deal on the public relations side of it? How do you stay ahead of these things?
Yeah, so good question. That recall was massive and, stemmed from, one ingredient supplier that was just supplying I think, several, 3 or 4 dozen companies at this point have done recalls related to that ingredient. The best way, what I advise my clients to do is be really proactive in, knowing what you're going to do before a recall hits. So, having, obviously you want to vet your suppliers, your co-packers, your ingredient suppliers, but then what a lot of companies don't do, and what they should be doing, is have a procedure for mock recalls. They do basically it's like a game even. Okay, we have this contaminated ingredient, let's trace it back to the finished product and vice versa. And
like some of the bankers around here will do for an SEC visit.
Yeah, exactly. And, make it even just like a fun day event, schedule 2 mock recalls a year. And then, you're not scrambling when the recall hits and doing things like doing 1 recall notice, then expanding it out wider and, having it be discombobulated.
Now, is there a point at which it's good to start pointing the finger at the ingredient supplier, or is it more just trying to act as above board as possible, as quickly as possible in the face of the consumer?
I mean, I think it depends on the situation. It's never good to point fingers, I think. Of course, in this instance, everyone in the industry is very aware that it, stems from a contaminated ingredient. I think when a recall does hit, being as transparent as possible with consumers is what's the most effective in keeping loyalty to your brand.
So let's move away from recalls for a minute and talk about lawsuits.
Other fun stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I once spoke with the head of the Center for Science and the Public Interest, and we were talking, I just said to him, how can the brands in our audience avoid getting sued by you? And he said, keep your head down. Stay small and don't make promises you can't keep. But
that's pretty big.
It's hard though, because it feels like the number of promises that brands think they're keeping are constantly being questioned by other folks who add even more promises that these brands hadn't even thought of. In other words, it's a crazy litigation environment out there right now. So what do you do?
Well, it is a crazy litigation environment. The lawsuits in 2015 actually went down, I think, although we're expecting them to pick back up because of a few, regulatory events. Most generally, I've advised companies to just, check in with counsel periodically and make sure they're sort of ahead of the litigation trends and know what to look out for, because it's not always, the lawsuits aren't always obviously avoidable if you're not sort of focused on, what plaintiffs' attorneys are focused on. So for example, companies that were labeling as natural, thought they're
fine.
natural, and then some plaintiff's attorney comes out and says, no, you're not natural because you might have a genetically modified oil that you're using, which is something that they never, might have considered.
Do you recommend supply chain audits for brands?
For sure, yeah. For sure.
And I wonder, when you talk about the regulatory environment changing, if you could talk about some of those changes and what you expect the level of legal activity to be in their wake. So, for example,
Sure.
Sodium.
Yeah, sodium, the FDA just came out with new guidelines for sodium that affects, I think about 200 different types of products. Of course, that will be a new area of litigation for plaintiffs' lawyers. There's sort of three areas that I would, want to highlight as sort of the key litigation areas that I expect coming up. And I can talk about each more if you want.
Absolutely.
But, I would say healthy labeling is one. Sugar labeling and labeling around GMO claims. Healthy is, everyone probably knows at this point, is an FDA-defined term.
Yep. Although there's been some redefinition at the bequest of brands at this point, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the FDA is kind of reevaluating that term right now. Based on some pushback they got from Kind. As the term is currently defined, basically, it's kind of complex, but basically you need to be very low fat to use the term. And Kind bars said, yes, our products might not be very low fat.
That doesn't fit with the American diet.
Right, we have healthy nuts, and that definition that you were using is based on science from 20 years ago that's just outdated at this point. So there continues to be a lot of litigation around healthy. As that, I think, plaintiffs' attorneys want to, be in on, defining what that's going to mean in the future. On sugar labeling, that is really hot topic now for a couple reasons. One is that the FDA just came out with a new nutrition facts panel, which requires disclosure of added sugars, and they'll be, it's a little bit open for interpretation what that term might mean, and then I don't know if you want me to talk about.
And then the last one was non-GMO.
Right.
And we have to wrap up. But fortunately, we're going to be actually running a column that you and a partner wrote on non-GMO labeling and how brands can face the current situation coming up in Vermont.
Yep.
On Project NOSH in just a couple of days.
Super.
So I think anyone who wants to find out a little bit more about that can read the site after this event's over.
Cool.
So Rebecca, thank you very much for
Thanks
joining
for
us
having
here
me,
in
and
the
thanks for having me at
live
this
stream
event.
lounge.